Brown. I am vice president of Amen Clinics. I'm a nurse, an author, a speaker, martial artist, mother, and wife. And I'm super excited to be here as part of Dr. Bulsiewicz' virtual gut health summit. And gut health has been something near and dear to my heart for a long time, mostly because I have suffered. So I've been passionate about this topic for many, many years, and health and nutrition and exercise and what role that plays not only on your body, but also on your mind. I've been doing this, I've been a nurse for a much longer time, but I've been doing this part of health and fitness for about 20 years now. So I'm going to start off today by telling you a story. I like to tell stories a lot. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories. One is about a sick little girl who wanted to be a doctor, some drug addicted criminals, a couple gorillas, and a Bible believing minister. And it will make sense to you in the end, I promise. So my mother was actually a 16-year-old runaway, and she never finished high school and lived on the streets for a short time before she had me. So it's no surprise that I grew up with a lot of trauma and drama in my life. And my first memory when I was 2 years old was nearly drowning because I was left alone, and I was saved by my German Shepherd. When I was 4, I actually remember the day that the police officers came to my house because my uncle had been murdered in a drug deal gone wrong, and I was forgotten in that, all the fray. So I was sort of pushed aside, and I learned how to hide. I just felt like hiding was safer. I had one uncle in my house who was a heroin addict, and the other one was murdered in a drug deal gone wrong. So that'll tell you a little bit about my life. And a short time later, I actually began having frequent unexplained illnesses like high fevers. I was on antibiotics all the time, and I had upper and lower GIs that were unexplained. And I became what you call a frequent flyer at the hospital. So I was also a latchkey kid. My mom worked a lot. She was gone all the time, and I would just hide out in my house with my dog, and I soothed my anxiety with my best friends. Those of you who know what I'm talking about, the captain, the tiger, and the leprechaun. Yes, I am talking about those sugary cereals. So the chronic stress, though, and the poor quality food really attacked my immune system, and it set me up for a lifetime of chronic illnesses. In fact, I was really sick as a kid, and even going into my adult years. I've had 10 medical surgeries. I had cancer. But going back to my childhood, a few years later, my grandmother came to live with us when her diabetes became very unmanageable. It wasn't so she could take care of me, it was so I could help take care of her. And she and I shared the same diet. She did not eat well. And because my mother worked 3 jobs, I had to learn how to give her insulin shots when I was 11. And I remember the day the nurse told me that I could kill her if I gave her the wrong dose. And I was terrified. And then many more things happened. I'll sort of summarize. My first stepfather, when I was 12, my stepfather of 6 weeks actually molested me. And I had a sexual assault happen very oddly on the street walking to high school. It was sort of random. All of that to say that my life was pretty chaotic as a kid. And I believe that set me up for pretty much a lifetime of illness. And I'm going to get to the reason why coming up soon, but it definitely affected my gut health. And I even developed an eating disorder just because of the constant chaos that was my life that I could not get away from. I spent so much time around doctors that I really wanted to be one. But in my 20s, I was attacked again, and this time it was a sucker punch I never saw coming because it was from within my own cells, and I felt totally betrayed. I found out I had cancer, and it kept coming back. Started as thyroid cancer, which should have been easy enough, but it kept coming back over and over. And at one point, I was so sick that I was on 9 medications. Some of them were medications to manage the side effects of other medications. And when I complained and said there had to be a better way, the doctor told me that I should be grateful for all the medications and that I should just take them. And I was pretty frustrated. He told me that I was in denial and I should see a psychiatrist. Now, I highly recommend them if you need them, but that's not how I met my husband, just to be clear. I was not his patient. So ultimately, my story gets much better because I got the help that I wanted. I became my own advocate, which is what I really recommend people do. You have to be your own advocate. And why am I telling you this? Because children who grow up in chaos and trauma, or adverse childhood experiences, as it's called, or ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, have more illnesses, they have more gut issues, they die earlier, and have overall less success in life. This has been studied for a very long time, and I take this very personally now. But they have brain issues, and we're going to get to that. So it's really easy to label people, and it's much harder to ask why, especially when you grow up like I did. But at Amen Clinics, we believe that there are 4 circles that create illness and wellness. And you have to truly understand someone you have to understand their brain and body, their spirit, their mind, their social connections, what gives them meaning and purpose if you want to truly get somebody well. So for me to get well, the biological circle included transforming my diet. And that's what I'm going to talk a lot about today. When I learned the power of food and supplements on mental health, it was astounding, and on my physical health. The psychological circle, I actually went to therapy, a specific type of therapy called the EMDR, and that was super, super helpful. It was actually life-changing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I also learned to kill my ants or automatic negative thoughts, because if you don't control your mind will control you, and I had monkey mind for sure. The social circle is where I began to work on those relationships, because I had some pretty damaged relationships. I learned how to draw boundaries. And I realized that healing my past trauma was one of the most important things I could do for my future relationships. Because if you don't heal from what hurt you, you bleed on people who didn't cut you. I love that expression. And my spiritual circle was I learned to turn my pain into purpose so I could be here today, helping other people. But as awful as my story sounds, it's actually not that uncommon or even that dramatic. Did you know that there's research that suggests that children who grow up in chaos and trauma actually have similar brains to soldiers coming back from war? So the trauma, the emotional trauma in their brains looks very similar to soldiers coming back from war. Chronic childhood trauma actually damages the brain. It damages a developing brain. And that's part of the problem of why people become ill. And it sets them up for things, lots of lifetime chronic illnesses, including things like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, drug addiction, Alzheimer's disease, which is a really big one. Why? Because when the brain is damaged while it's developing, it affects things like the amygdala. The amygdala is which triggers your flight or fight. And you can get stuck in the fight mode, and your cortisol stays high, and it's very damaging to a growing body and brain. The prefrontal cortex gets damaged, and it actually has less overall activity. The prefrontal cortex is your brain's judge. It's your judgment center. It is what gives you forethought and gives you breaks and for making good decisions. So you tend to make overall less good decisions. You make worse decisions. The nucleus accumbens, which is the pain and pleasure center, also is damaged, and it leads to more risk-taking behavior. And then there's the hippocampus, which is your memory center. And that's what can also set you up for problems later in life, for cognitive issues later in life. So when you damage a developing brain, you put it at risk. And I just wasn't okay with the idea that I had to be a victim of this just because of something that happened to me as a child that wasn't my fault. So I wasn't okay with having less overall success, with being sick, even though I'd been chronically ill. So now that I had this information, I wanted to do something about it. So let me take a moment to discuss EMDR, since I mentioned it before, and it was part of my healing journey. It stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. It's a specific treatment for trauma. It's where you move your eyes back and forth with a therapist. The therapist has you move your eyes back and forth while you bring up a specific trauma. And what that does is the alternate left and right brain stimulation has been shown to calm the trauma and help you reprocess it. So it's really important. It was so helpful for me and for so many of our patients. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go. It actually is sort of a shortcut through a lot of trauma therapy, which I really liked. So I got to spend less time sort of reprocessing those emotions. And as I did my own work and healed my trauma, my husband actually introduced me to Major Lori Heiselman from the Salvation Army, who became very important to me. She actually took one of my classes and the Omni Diet, when I wrote the Omni Diet, which was my New York Times bestseller. And through that class, she actually lost 55 pounds, her hot flashes, headaches, psoriasis, and overall inflammation. And as she got well, she realized she was actually the director of the Salvation Army's largest drug rehabilitation program with 186. They had attendees and people staying there that were addicted, and they were mostly court-ordered criminals. But as she got well, she decided that she needed to pass this information on and get the people that were attending the addiction treatment center well. And she asked if I would help her. And I said, absolutely. This was something that was right up my alley. I would definitely help her. She wanted me to help transform the food in the center. And that was something I definitely wanted to do. But then she said, no, I want you to help with the people. And that was something I definitely didn't want to do. I couldn't do it. So I told my husband, I said, I started crying and I said, I just can't do it. God just picked the wrong person this time. And he said, no, honey, God picked the perfect person, but you have to tell them your story. And I had never told my story. This was a facade that I kept, and I built this facade very well over time. And it was really difficult. So I did this reluctantly, and I went in the first day and I never realized till then how much judgment I held for people with addiction and issues like that because of how much addiction was in my family and how much pain it had caused me. So a lot of the people in my family chose to repeat that road of addiction. And for me, it was like, I can't even be around you. But the really weird part was that we all had this common thread that attached us, that connected us, and it was childhood trauma. And when I really began to understand that, I realized we were all just scared children in need of healing, in need of hope. And that turned out to be some of my best work and favorite work I've ever done. When I got over myself, was able to work with them. And we even talked about judging each other. But my favorite testimonial was from Thomas. Thomas was a gang member who had lost his 6 children when the gang unit broke down his door. And he entered the program depressed, overweight, hopeless. He tried to pass his GED multiple times and failed it. And he thought he was stupid. He thought he was never going to be able to pass it. And so through this program, and I want you to keep in mind, we had to do this on a rock bottom budget. We had to transform their diet. So people who think it can't be done on a budget, not true. So he ended up losing 85 pounds. He was so excited today. He ran up to me with his big pants that didn't fit him anymore. He lost 85 pounds. His depression went away. And he passed his GED. He was so proud of himself. Before that, he thought he was stupid. This was really important work. These people had a common theme. They thought they were stupid. But when they started eating better, they realized they weren't stupid. But they had brain fog. They couldn't focus. Most of them ended up telling stories about how they had untreated ADD, which is another precursor for Alzheimer's disease. He left me this amazing testimonial. My life was a mess, and now it's a message. I've been tested, and now I have a testimony. I was a victim. Now I am victorious. I've been through trials. Now I am triumphant. And I love that so much. It means so much to me because you can be triumphant too, or people you coach can be triumphant too. So can food really impact the way we think, behave, and even our decision making? One of my favorite stories is about Bebek and Makola, two gorillas that live at the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. Unfortunately, Makola recently passed away, but they lived there for many years. And even though they were relatively young, they both suffered with heart disease. And the reason this is important is because warehoused gorillas often develop heart disease, but wild gorillas, it's never seen. Heart disease is never seen. They also had neurotic behaviors of pulling out their hair and eating it, regurgitating their food many times throughout the day. Also never seen in wild gorillas, but frequently seen in warehoused or gorillas in zoos. So this perplexed the zoologists, and they wanted to know why. What was causing these warehoused gorillas around the world to have these behaviors that wild gorillas didn't have? So they were trying to do research, and they decided to start with their diet. You see, warehoused gorillas are commonly given nutritional cookies full of starch and sugar. And it was to ensure that they got their vitamins. But when they switched their diet back to a natural diet of greens, nuts, seeds, bamboo, berries, and they spread it all around their habitat, so they had to forage. All of a sudden, the gorillas both lost 65 pounds each. One reversed his heart disease, the other slowed the progression, and the neurotic behaviors stopped. And this is important because it often makes me think of the patients that we see that have similar issues. They've got cognitive issues. They have neurotic behaviors related to anxiety and depression. So were the gorillas sick or were they being poisoned? It's a really important question. It's food for thought. So I'm just curious how much you think food impacts your health and healing. In our work, we often say the real weapons of mass destruction are highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, low fiber foods that are packaged in plastic containers. So how can we heal as a society when we are actually being poisoned and we're giving even children and people in nursing homes and in prisons this low quality food, and we wonder why people's behavior is so bad? So one of the most important lessons we've learned, however, at Amen Clinics is that your brain's history is not your destiny. You can make it better even if you've been bad to it, and we can prove it. We've shown this over and over, and it's a message deeply personal to me. When Daniel and I first met, my father was confused and he'd become a recluse. He wouldn't come out of his room, and I had been estranged from him for decades because he had been a pastor and seminar leader for many years and probably shouldn't have been a pastor, and he didn't behave like a pastor. So this happened, and my sisters called me and they said, you need to help us. Dad, we don't know what to do for Dad. And I wasn't close to that side of my family at all. As I said, I'd been estranged from him. He had abandoned me when I was a baby. Then he embezzled money from his church. He was doing drugs with my sisters. And I'm like, this is not my circus, not my monkey. I don't need to do this. I don't want any part of this. But my husband, if you don't want to join the circus, don't marry a psychiatrist who obviously has these plans for changing the world. So Daniel had other ideas in mind. He actually wanted to bring my dad down, have him stay with me. And we were dating at the time. And he wanted to scan my dad because he said Alzheimer's can have many different causes. And I was reluctant to get involved, but my husband can be very persuasive. So my dad's scan, interestingly, was not the scan of someone with Alzheimer's disease. He had a condition called pseudodementia, which is depression that masquerades as Alzheimer's. He was also on a toxic cocktail of medications because he had sort of slipped through that Medicare road to hell, people just sort of putting him on medications and layering them and not really paying attention. And he was on this toxic cocktail that was stealing his mind. So he ended up doing everything that Daniel asked, and within a few months, his memory dramatically improved. He lost 20 pounds, started leading Bible study in my house, and then after 6 months was leading all-day seminars at the local church. He said it was like being raised from the dead. And 5 years later, he died of leukemia in my arms with me praying for him, something I never thought possible. Had he not fixed his brain, that never would have happened. Had he not been cognitively aware, we couldn't have healed our relationship. So food obviously has the power to heal or the power to hurt. So we often want people to start with an elimination diet. If you eliminate sugar, gluten, soy, dairy, corn, processed food, and alcohol, and you add vegetables, fruit, protein, fat, healthy fat, herbs, spices, and hydration, you're going to get better, right? And people are like, but that's everything in my house. I don't have anything to eat. That's not true. I actually have written multiple cookbooks. You can go to my website, which I'll give you at the end, and you will see that that's not true. But if those principles are so simple, why aren't people doing it? If you know that that's all you have to do, why aren't people doing it? If you know it's going to prevent Alzheimer's, reverse heart disease, do all these things, why don't you do it? Because people try to complicate it. So what I want to talk to you about, instead of going into all the details about each of those foods, because I'm going to give you a quick start guide, and I'm going to have you go to my website and you can pick up, you can see all my recipes. I just want you to make it simple. What I want you to start thinking about is crowding out some of the bad things. Instead of thinking about having to never have certain things, which feels like deprivation, each day think to yourself, before I even think about eating what I normally would want to eat, I'm gonna eat a plate of vegetables or a salad, and I'm gonna drink a big glass of water, and I'm gonna have some healthy fat like avocado or nuts. Then if I still want something, maybe I'll have it, but eat a healthy meal first and make tiny changes and make sure you celebrate your wins. So I wanna end with this. This work is so important because it has generational impact. It's not just about you, it's about generations of you. And I finished my recent book, The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child, with the story of my nieces, Alize and Amelie. They were born into a family of chaos, my family, and they were genetically loaded for trouble, multiple suicides, schizophrenia, depression, drug abuse, anxiety. Genetics were a mess, but genes only load the gun. It's the decisions we make and what happens to you that sort of pulls the trigger or not. Unfortunately, they were also raised in chaos and with parents who suffered with addiction, domestic violence, depression, anxiety. And when anyone in a family suffers, everyone suffers. That's really important. And they tend to pass it on. So the girls went to many different schools and they often didn't have enough to eat. They were in multiple accidents, car accidents, because their parents were impaired. Life was unpredictable and terrifying. And about 4.5 years ago, the girls came to live with us when Child Protective Services came and took them away and placed them into foster care where yet more traumas occurred. And at the time, I was also estranged from my sister, my half-sister, because of her addiction and the constant chaos in her life. But when the girls were taken, I knew that I, once again, reluctantly had to get involved. I was reluctant to bring that back into my life. But we wrapped services around Tamara, my sister, and with our help, she did get the girls back on Mother's Day of 2017. And she was able to be sober long enough to do that. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Sometimes the illness does win, sadly. They came to live with us. The girls came to live with us about 3.5 years ago. And they are now thriving. But when you combine genetic vulnerability with traumatic experience, Alize and Amelie were at extremely high risk for mental illness. But they're not, they're thriving. They're happy, they're both straight A students, they're social, they have positive modeling, and we are putting their brains and their bodies in a healing environment. And oh, by the way, Alize is a senior in high school. She just is graduating with not one, but 2 AA degrees. Yes, 2 associate's degrees while she's graduating from high school, and she just got into UCLA. We couldn't be more proud. Didn't happen overnight. There were a lot, it's been quite the journey when you have traumatized children come live with you, but with a little patience and a lot of grace and a lot of love, we turned that around. So please go to TanaAmon.com and you can get my free tools. There's free meditation videos, recipes, and my quick start guide to help you get started on this journey.